Good evening, people. We are back again. We never left anyway. Actually, we did leave. We were in Qatar not too long ago to check out some of the games that was played in the Qatar Masters. Very, very strong tournament, which was won by Esipenko. Yeah, Esipenko of Russia. But now we're in Oslo, Norway. What are we doing in Oslo, Norway? Well, we are here to cover the Champions Chess Tour finals for the year 2024. And we have some very big shots playing at this tournament. Leading the big shots, we have Magnus Carlsen. One, we have Alireza. Two, we have Maxime France. Three, we have Wesley So. Four, we have Dennis. Five, we have Levon Aronian. Six, we have Vincent Kema. Seven, and we have Ian Nepomniachtchi. Eight. I remember playing Ian at the Olympiad. I think it was the Baku Olympiad. I think the first round Russia played against Nigeria, I remember, yes. And I played Ian, and yes, it didn't go well. Anyway, so let us get right into this game. Now we're about to check out the game from the big boys. Like when you're talking about the big boys, they just do whatever they want to do. And I'm going to tell you why they're able to do that. Anyway, let us get right into it. So this is a game played between the two Frenchmen, the original Frenchman and the naturalized Frenchman. So what am I talking about? This is a game played between Alireza France, who was originally from Iran, but now he's a naturalized French citizen. He's playing against his compatriot, Grandmaster Maxime France. So Vashev is rated 2852 and Alireza rated 2870. Now, these are their rapid ratings because this game is actually a 10+2 rating. Probably quick, rapid, something like that. So, I'm not going to tell you the name of this opening. You just figure out what the name of this opening is. But let us get right into it. The game started with knight f3, d5, white plays to c4. Looking like a red-tip opening, right? Let's keep going. d4. Say, I'm going to gain some more space. I'm just push my foot for gain some space. So, white plays b4. This is the point where people that are not familiar with this land are like, what in the world is it doing? How has this b4, what does it have? What's the connection with b4 and get your pieces of good space and all that? Wow, this is crazy. Why would he just play b4? I'm going to make a statement concerning that. And of course, the opponent plays g5. Now, when you look at this position for the first time, you'll be like, this got to be two parts as playing. B4, g5, what's the point? What's the meaning of this? Now, I'm going to say this. We've always told to get our pieces on the best squares. We're always told to develop our pawns, get our pawns in the game, get to knights, bishops, and all that stuff. Now, when it comes to chess, right, it gets to a point where you know a whole lot that you know enough to be able to break those rules. You're breaking the rules not because you're reckless, but because you really can't make things work. And I've always said this in some of my videos. If you can't come up with any kind of position and make it work, hey, that's fine. So right now, what is the idea of g5? Of course, the idea of g5 is to displace the knight from f3, which has a very strong hold on these squares. Okay, and b4, of course, it's a multi-purpose move. Keeping an eye on the c5, bishop is going to come to b2, putting pressure on the pawn on d4. So g5 looks like a very crazy and reckless move. But hey, you know what? Time will tell. After the move g5, white plays h3, trying to keep that pawn in check. Like, I don't want you running down the board. If you're going to move your pawn to g4, that's fine. So when I take, you take back with the bishop. I have the h file, so that's something good for me. So after the move g5, h3 is played. Now h6 says, what? I'm going to defend the pawn with my h6 pawn. And this is the thing. Once you get to this point, be ready to play this kind of position because this is what you wanted. Right? So that's why when you're playing, you really have to know exactly what you're getting into. And I've said this all the time. Chess is respecter of nobody. It doesn't matter what your rating is, wherever you are. You have to make good moves. If you don't make good moves, you're going to get in trouble. So d3 makes a lot of sense. You're protecting the pawn on c4. You're clearing the d2 square for the knight or the bishop. But I think the knight will be better because you want the bishop to be on b2, putting pressure on the pawn on d4. Come to think about it, I think this b4 move is pretty much stopping this pawn from defending that. That's one of the reasons. And one of the ways black can take advantage of this b4 is to hit it with the move a5. Because if you take, you can just move your pawn to c5. You don't have to take right away. that pawn is not going anywhere because you have the rook on a8, you have the queen on d8, and you could also get a knight to c6, putting pressure on that pawn. Although you would have established the protection for the pawn on d4 with the pawn on c5. So let's keep going. Bishop to g7, g3 makes a lot of sense. And even amongst the strong players like Super Grandmaster, you could see that they still stick to the principles. Right now, there is no way this bishop is going to get anything to do on this part of the board. Immediately, the GM realizes my worst placed piece right now is my bishop on g2. Because if I want to move this bishop to any square, I really don't have any squares to move that bishop. Not the bishop on c1. I can go to b2, I can go to d2. Not the knight on b1. I can go to a3, I can go to d2. No other minor pieces is looking very bad than the bishop on f1. So what do? G3. Why I want to get this bishop to the good squares. Like I said, even the super GMs know the rules and they stick to it. Well, sometimes. e4 is played, bishop to g2, knight to e7, knight b d2, keeping the extra protection on the square e4, and protecting the knight on f3, and of course developing a minor piece. So there are possibilities for this line, right? So, castles, queen to b3. What's the point of queen to b3? I think this is like a waiting move, coupled with some move with some very bad intention. Now, let's look at this position. If we're given this position at a glance, and we're asked to come up with a plan for white, okay? For me, the most logical thing I would say is, you know what, since these pawns are overextended, and these pawns are the pawns that are supposed to be defending the king, what I would tend to do is want to attack those pawns. Because I know that if those pawns get off the board somehow, I can get to this king. So I'll be tempted to try to create some attack on this part of the board to try to get to this king. I'm not going to try to come to the king side. I'm not even going to try to castle right away. I'm just trying to look for a way to attack this pawn so that I can get to this king. So queen b3 actually is kind of in line with that. Because at the end of this day, this bishop can get to either b2 or a3, or let's say b2. The king can always castle long, and then we can start to create some play on the king side. So let's see what happened after that move. Bishop to e6, putting pressure on this queen immediately. So the queen has to keep an eye on moves like b5. Although you don't want to play b5 because I have knight takes e5. You know, the bishop here also. I have a bishop too. So you got to be careful. So Alireza played knight to e4. What's the point of knight to e4? Of course, number one is improving the placement of his pieces. I say this all the time. Improve the placement of your pieces. That means if your piece is on a certain square looking good, try to get it to a better square. So what's the knight doing on e4 really? There's pressure on f6, there's pressure on g5, there's pressure on c5, and from c5 I can attack the bishop on e6, I can attack the pawn on b7. So white is actually making some headways now. We really can't say that about black. Even though black pieces doesn't look as bad, bishop is not looking bad, knight is not looking bad, but I really don't believe on this bishop on g7. Of course, this knight has to get into the game as quick as possible, otherwise there's going to be a problem. So after the move knight to e4, knight d7, this is what I'm talking about. I'm happy that this GM also sticks to the principle. Get your pieces to good squares, good things happen. So he decides to develop his last minor pieces. These are super grandmasters. I just told you their ratings. One is rated 2870, one is rated 2852. So I think they believe in good moves as well. So because if you don't make those good moves, you're going to get in trouble. So now in this position, the knight comes to d7, stopping the knight from coming to c5 because I can just take it. So I don't have to worry about this bishop getting harassed. But right now, this white has to consider the move f5. f5 might come at any point in time. And with the move f5, you have to move the knight. And then if you don't have a chance of getting this king safely, black can actually run you over on this part of the board. So after the move knight d7, white plays g4. Does that make sense? Yes, it does. What kind of sense does it make? Well, it stops f5. Because after f5, I can take back, and I can play moves like h4. All of a sudden, I have all the pieces trying to participate to come say hello to this king on g8. So g4 is played here, and we have knight to g6. Let us look at this board and just break it down. Let's ask ourselves questions. White has his minor pieces, e4, f3, g2, bishop c1. So how many of these minor pieces have an influence on the king side? We have the knight on e4, pressure on G5, on F6 and G5. We have the knight on F3. There's a pressure on G5. We have the bishop on C1, pressure on G5 and H6. The bishop on G2 pretty much keeps the knight on the queen side. So we're not going to say this bishop here can have any participation, anything to do with the king side. But we have the minor pieces all looking at the king side. We don't want to forget the rook on H1. Even though we have pawns on H3 and H6, the fact there's a rook on H1, this king has to be very, very uncomfortable because bad things can happen very quickly. So after the move G4, the knight goes to, excuse me, after the move knight to G6, H4. This is what I'm talking about. You know, the rule says develop all your pieces before starting the attack. But now, this pawn cannot move. The pawn on G5 cannot move. So if I move the pawn to H4, you have to capture. And this is what's happening here. White is pretty much pulling black into this game by forcing black to make some exchanges that opens up the king's position that allow white to attack this king. So right now, even though black has all these pieces here, D7, E6, and G6, of course the queen also keeping an eye on this position, by the move, making the move H4 is pretty much trying to open up the position to get to this king. So H4 is played, and I'm not so sure if that was the best move, but then you definitely supposed to move. H4 is played, captures. Now remember that pawn, how did that pawn get to G5 in the first place? That pawn had been on G5 since my second or third move, maybe. That pawn has been there for a while. So now the pawn has to move away, creating some opportunities for the white pieces to get a closer look at how the black king is doing on G8. Maybe he's doing fine or no, we don't know, but we just want to check. Now we really can't get back because we have 1-2 attacking, he has 1-2 defending. So what do? We do another pawn push. Now we attack the G5 pawn that was moved earlier. Now we're attacking the H6 pawn. If you remember, these two pawn moves were made much earlier in the game. And I'm sure when Maxime made this move, he didn't envisage stuff like this happening. So after the move G5, F5. Of course, at this point, white is already in the driver's seat here. F5 was not the best move here, F5. But what black is trying to do is, of course, this knight is very annoying, trying to get this knight off the board. So at this point, after the move F5, Alireza simply takes on H6. Simply takes on H6 because, for example, if you take on E4, I'm going to take on G7, attacking the rook. And if you capture, I have knight to G5, which is a very strong move. I'm attacking the bishop, threatening the king, the rook, and the queen. That's more than a family. And then, of course, threatening to take the pawn. I mean, I have a whole lot of stuff going on. And guess what? My queen is not even participating right now. Think about this. The queen, the white queen is not even, she's right here on B3, just chilling. Like, hey, guys, just go ahead and do what you can do. Just chilling. So now we go back. This didn't happen in the game. So after the move, F5 takes on H6. It takes the, oh, sorry, is that what happened in the knight? It took, now, after taking, it plays knight to G5. It plays knight to G5. H takes G7 wouldn't have worked because there was rook takes F3, right? I missed that. But here, white just simply creates a threat, knight to G5, putting pressure on this bishop. Very soon we're going to appreciate the fact that queen is on B3. Like, how in the world did they know this queen is going to cause mayhem on B3? So knight G5, what is the threat? I'm threatening to take on E6, attacking the queen, the rook, and the bishop. And I'm also simply just threatening to take the bishop on G7, getting my piece back. But what has white achieved in this position? He has been able to open up the king's position. If you notice, this king is just here breathing, not even worrying about anything. Meanwhile, there are a lot of opportunities for white to get to this black king. So after the move knight to G5, E3 was played. You know, this is, you see this, I mean, Super GM, this is the way they roll. Now, we really would have loved to take here on E3 so that we can take on E6. But we cannot eat our cake and have it at the same time. We can't do that. So whatever happens here, so it's not going to work out for white. So after the move E3, takes on E6, attacking the queen, attacking the rook, attacking the bishop. So it gets his piece back. but still this king is still on E1. I'm like, how in the world? What exactly is going on here? The only person that will need any kind of defending in this position is the black king. This white king is just safe, 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 and safe. Absolutely no threat. The bishop on G7 is more of a liability, even though it defends the king right now. The knight on G6 maybe has some jumps. The knight on D7 maybe has some jumps as well. But with this king stuck on G8, he's going to have to worry about the long diagonal. He's going to have to worry about the file. So there's a lot of things happening this king has to answer to. So after the move, knight takes E6, queen goes to F6, threatening check and taking on G2. That's all. Not a mate, just threatening check. So what does white do? White plays C5. Not the best move. Not the best move. The best move was just simply move the rook to E1. And now after rook to E1, for example, you cannot take the knight because, hello, you lose your queen. And that's just pretty much over. But the thing is, when you have a very strong position, sometimes when you don't make the best move, things can sometimes work out. Sometimes. So C5 is played here. Queen takes F2 check. King simply steps to D1. Bishop takes G7 because the pawn is still threatening to take the bishop. So bishop takes G7. Then knight takes check. King has to take. Now, after the king takes, it pretty much bringing the king and the queen onto the same file. Unfortunately, there's rook F1, pinning the queen to the king. Meanwhile, this king is just here having a vacation. Okay, so after rook F1, captures back, and after the king goes to E7, bishop H3. And at this point in time in the game, I think black resigned. Very, very interesting game. It's interesting to know that when the queen got to B3, we had no idea how this queen was going to actually participate in the, in the hunt for this king. But along the line, we find out that after the move C5, this king is not just looking good. So after the move bishop H3, white simply much won this game through the resignation of black. So what could that be a good continuation? There's just king to C2, bishop to maybe B2, or maybe A3, and there's just rook comes to the game. And it's a close position, even though these knights are currently doing well. Bishop is almost like a liability, thanks to his pawns on E5, D4, and E3. Okay, so this was actually from the 6th round of the Champions Chess Tour, presently going on in Norway. Very interesting game. I'm going to try to bring some more of these games going on at this chess tour to us as soon as possible. I hope you enjoyed the game. If you have any comments, if you have any questions, if there are any contributions, let us know. And we always like to have you here. Take care, see you, God bless, and bye for now.